Who you see on the outside is not who I am or how I feel on the inside.
It's a struggle to be happy every day.
The things I used to enjoy, I don't enjoy anymore.
No matter who tries to step into your shoes, nobody really knows what it actually feels like.
Every year, millions of Americans suffer from some type of mental illness. According to Mental Health America, 1 in 5 Americans will suffer from some type of mental illness in their lifetime. That number comes out to roughly 40 million, which is just a meager amount more than the state of California's population. And out of that 40 million Americans was a man by the name of Sean Smith.
Sean Smith was a man just like you and I, except he wasn't like you and I. Like over 40 million Americans, Sean had suffered from a terrible disease of the body, brain, and soul known as mental illness. Sean had suffered with depression and anxiety for much of his adult life, but he never let that define him. Yes, at times his depression and anxiety would come knocking at his door, but Sean never let them in. Until January of 2017. In January of 2017, Sean had been promoted to work on a project that he himself felt underqualified to be a part of. His anxiety took hold of him and manipulated his brain. To get a better understanding of depression and anxiety and Sean Smith's history, we sat down with Dr. Michael Bradley, a psychiatrist that had treated Sean for many years.
Anxiety is a completely separate sort of a disorder, and it results from a hyperactivation of part of the brain that back in our evolutionary history was actually very helpful. 500,000 years ago, our ancestors roaming around maybe saw a threat, saber-toothed tiger. Part of their brain, the amygdala system, we call the fight or flight response, would light up, and your body would fill with adrenaline, you would breathe faster, heart pounds faster, you sweat, so that it helps you run or fight. And then after the threat is over, you calm back down to a normal state. So it's kind of like a supercharger in a car where you get this burst of energy, which is fine if you're just using it occasionally, but if you use it all the time, you're going to burn out the engine. When somebody has anxiety, what happens is that they perceive non-lethal threats as things that will kill them. So that if somebody, for example, gets a C on an exam, if they have anxiety, that part of the brain can light up as if it's a lethal threat. But instead of that C stimuli, the concept of seeing the C getting tracked to the front of the brain, which can say, well, that sucks, but I can do better on the next test, the stimuli goes to the back of the brain where it's perceived as a lethal threat. And then you get that fight or flight response with the adrenalization, increased heart rate, and that can make people feel as if they're in a state of terror. Some people feel they're going to die. They can get a panic attack because in today's world, we can't run away from the sea. We have to sit there and take it. So we're kind of in conflict with our own design. Depression is a biochemical condition where the brain doesn't have the chemistry to allow the individual to enjoy the parts of life that help us want to be alive. It can be crushing because they can be in that state 24/7. It corrupts their ability to eat and sleep and think, and it wears them down. And the anxiety can then create a depressive state where life just becomes again intolerable and has no pleasure because they're in a sort of constant state of pain. People who have these disorders often feel increasingly isolated because they get a lot of bad advice from people that don't understand, that try to tell them to put on a happy face and fake it till you make it and all that sort of stuff, which just increases their symptoms. Unless you've had it, you don't understand how overwhelming it can be. Put you on your knees. Well, Sean was an interesting client because he, in his experience, sort of portrayed the tragic metaphor of these diseases. Sean was someone I worked with over a number of years who was exhibiting signs of depression and anxiety in particular. And it was an anxiety that we were unable to treat effectively. Sean went through essentially every treatment we know of to combat anxiety, some of them very radical treatments. Sean went from A to Z. The interesting part of Sean was he knew that he had this disorder. We couldn't give him an effective treatment, and he fought it to the brutal end. And he was a very tough man. He was a football player. He was an athlete, an Ironman kind of a person. And his personality actually incorporated positivism and look on the bright side. And, you know, pain is weakness leaving the body and all that sort of stuff. He loved all that. And he would grapple with challenges. He looked forward to challenges. And then he had this insidious disease that slowly was taking him over. Sean, I believe, after reviewing the record of treatment after he left here and went on to more aggressive forms of treatment, suffered from CTE, the football player's disease. And that's specific brain damage that causes deterioration of certain physiological brain functions, and that creates this depressive and anxiety-based reaction that we saw that just overwhelmed Sean and ultimately took him out. To the end, I believe, he fought hard. He did not quit. He would not quit in the face of this onslaught. Yeah, when I saw the duality of Sean, that he was a fighter and there was nothing he would not do to beat his opponent, and in this instance it was this disease, then I suspected it was something bigger than any of us could treat. And as I saw his symptoms progress, in spite of the fact he was doing everything we all recommended, then I began to develop this nagging suspicion that this was CTE, because I knew of his background as an athlete, particularly as a football player, sometimes a brawler, getting punched in the head. And again, this is a guy that didn't mind that. I don't think he ever took advantage of people. He would take on people his size or bigger because he loved the challenge, a fair fight sort of a thing. CTE itself can cause anxiety because it creates biochemical changes in the brain, again, where that rear part of the brain, the amygdala system, the fight or flight response, hyperactivates. So Sean, for example, who would handle all sorts of challenges, would find himself overwhelmed because he had a report due at work, and he would come apart and knew that his reaction was abnormal and off the charts, but he couldn't find a way of mastering that. So he was perceiving the report as the saber-toothed tiger coming at him, and then we'd have to struggle with that kind of activation 24/7 sometimes. Sean left me to go on to more aggressive forms of treatment, but when I heard after the fact that we lost Sean and got the history, that's when I concluded, with as much certainty as we can have, he was really taken out by CTE. He would follow every recommendation, and the tragic part was nothing was working for him. So his presentation, I think, is a metaphor for the duality that occurs with people who struggle with depression and or anxiety, where their essence, their whatever you want to call it, their heart, their psyche, their soul, is set up of a certain set of character traits and values and beliefs, and then you have this disease entity that can actually kind of send its tentacles into that, and it begins to rob people of themselves.
And I remember when we were in high school, there was like a suicide prevention thing in the auditorium, and somebody got up there and said, whatever is so terrifying and so horrible at this moment, in a year from now, you're going to look back and say, God, why did I get so upset about that?
Sean passed away on May 11th, 2017, after years of fighting a good fight. As Sean is gone from this world, there is something quite valuable that we can learn from his life, and that is to never give up.
If we've learned anything from Sean's life, it's that treatments are always the best option, and that sometimes, despite what happens, there's someone always there, willing to talk to you and help you through your tough situation. Just remember that it's never too late to seek help.